Jerry McAbee, who's on the call today, is retired Marine Corps Brigadier General. PT sent me just a little info on him. I did a little more research, and he has a distinguished career, 35 years in the Marine Corps. He's a former commander of Marine Corps Base Hawaii. He was Deputy Commander, Commanding General of Marine Corps Marine Forces Central Command. He has a number of medals on his chest, which I won't go over, but he and our colleague PT have known each other from their time in Afghanistan together and perhaps some other places. General is retired now. He lives in Alabama. That's why I was asking him about how Hurricane Ida treated him, and he said they had plenty of rain, but otherwise came through okay. Excuse me. Before that introduction, let me just remind you all, we have an exhibit opening in 22 days in Sacramento at the California State Library on Joe Rosenthal and other combat correspondence. So we have an opening event at 2 p.m. on the 23rd, 900 N Street, N as in Nancy, in Sacramento. And the exhibit will be up Monday through Friday through the end of February. So if you're passing by Sacramento or choose to make a trip in to see the exhibit, I think it'll be worth your while. So General, take it away. You can introduce PT, and then PT, the rest of the meeting is yours.
Well, thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to say a few introductory remarks about my very good friend, Patrick Brent. Between 2003 and 2005, Patrick accompanied me on at least 3 trips to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Djibouti. During these trips, we crisscrossed Iraq and Afghanistan aboard Air Force C-17s, Marine Corps and Air Force C-130s, Marine Corps CH-46 and CH-53 helicopters, Army Black Hawk helicopters, and Marine Corps Humvees and 5-ton trucks. Patrick often put himself in harm's way to get a story no one else wanted to cover. These included the private or lance corporal on duty at some obscure post, or on a lonely patrol at midnight, or performing some mundane duty. Patrick demonstrated a refreshing concern for these often forgotten Marines and sailors. He was there to get their stories and to make sure they were sent back to local hometown newspapers for print. These were human interest stories that would have otherwise never been published. They were stories that told parents, friends, and neighbors about the role their Marine was playing in the much larger global war on terrorism. Patrick's stories increased morale and made the common soldier feel his or her service was important, appreciated, and not forgotten. This was all done selflessly and unselfishly, much at his own expense. Patrick is living proof that once a Marine, always a Marine is more than some empty slogan, that patriotism is as much at home in civilian attire as it is in Marine Corps utilities. I close by saying that when introducing Patrick to the Marines, I often told them that he was their only pal. I thought that then, I still do today. Thank you.
Thank you, General McAbee. My gratitude has to go out to you for many, many things that we take forever to talk about, but I also want to give a mahalo to Bob Vincent, our technical wizard, and Tom Graves, who makes everything happen. General McAbee, you know what the definition of a sea story is? Well, what we're about to do today is tell something that's very unusual. We're telling some sea stories that are true. True, really true. The question is, how did an aging Marine Corps veteran get to be a second-rate journalist and travel to these faraway places with strange names like Fallujah, Kandahar, Djibouti, Guantanamo Bay? The process of doing this, I became somewhat of a convert in as much as I, when we first went to all these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Bush 43, George W. wanted to not only kill all the bad guys, he wanted to, nation build. He wanted to make these people a little bit more like America. When I first went in these trips, I believed that. Well, I'm a convert today. I just want to kill the bad guys and I want to stay home. About 10 years ago, I wrote a story called Fort Apache, Afghanistan. And I really believe this, that when I went to a place like Djibouti and and Bagram could have been one of those, where we go to a place where they have, we might be even in an enemy territory, but we can have a secure place from which we can operate. And the Old West from, I think it was 1868 to 1920, Fort Apache in Arizona, the Army was there, and they would go out and they would kill the bad Indians, and sometimes, sadly, the good Indians, and they'd go back to the fort, they'd have a beer. Well, that's what I learned, and I was with the general at times with the fort, a place called Camp Lamonier. It previously was a French Foreign Legion base, right on the in the armpit of Africa. Some people call it that. The French Foreign Legion would operate the same way. They'd have a base and they'd go out and kill the people that were not serving their best interest, and they would then go home and have a beer. Djibouti is, let me see if I got it right here. Djibouti is, well, I think a couple of the older Marines here probably knew Alexander the Great. He didn't do very well in Afghanistan. And then we went to Fort Apache here. There's an article that I put on CNN, and they ran it for about 10 years. It's not exactly a brilliant concept. The whole idea is to be safe and take care of our people and go get the bad guys and go home. We have warships to do that. We have bases to do that. And the idea of trying to convert these countries to our way of life just doesn't work. Here is one of the bases I wanted to do that with, and suggested it for many years, was Bagram, because I went to Bagram with General McAbee and many other people, and they had you knew the Air Force and the Navy had been to these bases before, because they had Burger King and McDonald's and Subway and ice cream and pancakes. They had all the American fast food pieces there, and the same as they do in Guantanamo Bay. Because we all know that the Navy and the Air Force likes to, when they go to on deployment, likes to be somewhat comfortable. Well, what we did in Afghanistan, instead of just going for the bad guys, we went back. I think George W. Bush 43 wanted to be somewhat of an evangelist and wanted to convert these people. He didn't listen to his father's advice. His father, during the Gulf War, had a 100-hour battle, forced Saddam into a peace treaty, and I kind of think Saddam honored most of that. But so anyway, after 100 hours, he stopped, and he was highly criticized for it, including me. And but later on, he gave a talk about the different religions, the Sunnis, and the various types of Muslim religion, and the fact that dictatorships seem to thrive better in a culture like that. He said it would have really big mess if we had tried to capture all Iraq. Well, his son didn't follow that policy. And then when we got to Afghanistan, I went to a couple of locations, villages, where they had something called the PRT. That means Provincial Reconstruction Team. And we take a field grade officer, like a major or a lieutenant colonel. And in fact, the one that the general and I went to, we had it's kind of built like a fort. And they would have people they would hire people like plumbers, carpenters, medical people, teachers, and they basically try to make these villages into South Bend, Indiana. And these people would stare at us. They were amazed that we were doing this. So was I. And because these people go back to a time culture 2,000 years ago, the time of Christ. Their life was filled with camels, goats, sheep. Their treatment of women, girls, and little boys was abominable. And in fact, I understand that their Afghanistan's number 2 export is mutton, and I understand number 1 is opium, which has just gone up in price because there's a rumor that market might be stopping. They produce 80% of the opium in the world in Afghanistan, mostly in the southwestern area. So going back to this quick review, back in 2001, right after 9/11, 88% of America was for going to war and going to get these guys in Afghanistan. 99% of Congress and the Senate was. I think there's only 1 or 2 people that held out. But of course, it's a month after 9/11, and tempers were really up there. So we sent General Mattis, a friend of mine, and he went to something called Operation Rhino. He landed in the middle of the night with helicopters and C-130s, and then he drove overland to Kandahar, which was at the time was the headquarters of the Taliban. They arrived with the Marines and the Army soldiers, and they wiped them out. In fact, there's still I think Jerry and I saw it. There's a structure there, a fort that was their headquarters, and it's all pockmarked with 50 caliber shells. And the Marines later put a sign up called Taliban's Last Stand. And so I have to tell you, at times when I see how we tried to change these cultures, I wonder why we didn't just leave Saddam, Gaddafi, and Noriega in power. It seems to me if these dictators are not doing anything bad to America and listening to us, we don't really need to take over their country. You know, before you know it, the Chinese will own the Panama Canal, and Afghanistan and Iraq will still be a mess. I think that's already happened. The people in ancient times, they called Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. Yeah. Why? Because the Russians, you know, had 10 years there and failed. Genghis Khan went through there and didn't stay. As you know, and of course Alexander the Great made this famous remark. The Afghanistan is the British had a much worse exit. You know, they were in Kabul in 1842, and they weren't doing well with the locals, and they decided to pull out, surrender Afghanistan just like we did, like we surrendered, and they decided to go towards India. They did a deal that they could exit with their people towards Jalalabad and then on to India, and the Taliban made an agreement on it. So when they got to this pass called Kurd Pass, a 5-mile long pass, the Taliban on both sides came down on them. 4,000 British soldiers, 12,000 civilians, women and children were all massacred in a couple of days of just an absolute bloodbath. They had permitted one medical doctor, a British medical doctor, one horse, and he was permitted to go on towards India so that everybody would know just how the Taliban felt about strangers coming to their country. It's a tribal culture. You know, in our own country, we had, and when Columbus first came here to the Americas, we had 38,000 Native Americans living here and 574 tribes. Later on, now, today, we still have 574 tribes and only 5 million American Indians. Taliban has, I think it's around 40 different types of tribes. I think the headgear they wear represents their tribe in some ways. And these tribes they're 99.7 Muslim, but they're most of them are Sunni, I believe, and the others are Shiite. But these tribes have their own culture, and it doesn't seem there's any one faction that can really control the entire country. I I wanted to go here to, seems like right now, after our surrender, we're in, let me go to this one side I want to show you here. You know, people, our president says that we lost a lot of troops and that the local army didn't have the guts to stand up and do their own thing. Well, these numbers don't testify to that. You know, after we started pulling back the army, we put a lot of soldiers of fortune or contract type people in there. A lot of Marine veterans went in, and the service members killed through the whole 20-year war was 2,448. But you see, your contractors had more people dead. And the Afghan military and police had 66,000. Look at this, the civilians. See, I hope everybody can see that. What I'd like to now do is show you a couple other things from my travels. Of course, here is Kabul, which, by the way, the Russians built a phenomenal base at Bagram. It has 2 runways, one's 12,000 feet long, and they even built a wide open highway straight down to Kabul, because when the highway before it curves, they were getting ambushed a lot, so they built a highway. And so it's about 60 miles or about an hour and a half drive away between the capital and Bagram. Where if we'd stayed at Bagram, it would have been a safe exit, and we could have stayed there. It's like at the height of Denver, it's like 5,000 feet in elevation. We could have stayed there and had a perimeter. And I can assure you, if we did it right, they don't mess with us in Cuba. We would survive. We'd have one great forward operating base. Well, and here in Guantanamo Bay, same thing. We've been there for many, many years. It originally was a coal station where the Navy ships could resupply their coal. But we have McDonald's and everything else there. I've been there twice. My nephew was the first lieutenant when he was based there. Here's a scene from Guantanamo Bay. They have every fast food there is there. Now here's a fellow I met in Djibouti. I think it was with General when I met him. I carried a rosary that there's a gentleman that got thrown out of the Catholic seminary in Chicago the same time I did, and we became buddies. And he gave me this Irish rosary made with Irish stone, and I had it blessed in every one of the camps I made when I ran across the chaplain, and I later buried it with my mom. And here's a handsome guy I met several times. He was upset about the background. He wanted a broken down trailer or something. And when I was in Balad on the north end of Iraq, this is the barber. He works as a CB. For $1 you get a haircut. And I found out later that he works for the undertaker in El Paso. He cut only dead people's hair. So I promised him I wouldn't move too much. Now here's a guy I fell in love with, Sergeant Major Hoopy, and he knows my hoop. And he and I and the general got in a C-130 and took a heck of a long flight, landed in Kandahar. This is the night before we left. And this is all pictures from Iraq. This is the newspapers in Hawaii, since General McAbee was the boss here in Hawaii at Marine Corps Base, they wanted a story about him. That story was published in several newspapers. And this is one of the many different aircrafts we took. We travel. It's much better to travel with the general than on your own. And then, and now this is my very last. This is my freedom flight. This is on September the 12th, 2004. The day before, we were in an ambush, and it's breaking news. And this gentleman on the right, the colonel on the right, speaks Arabic, Japanese, about 5 other languages. He was on staff to General McAbee. And what happened is I had just sent him one version of my story to UBI and a few other people. And we all decided to collaborate on a little better tune-up on it. And so this is on a C-130. We left after the change of command in Fallujah. General Conway surrendered his command to John Stalder. And we took off on that plane. We went straight to Bahrain, kind of got recycled, went to Trader Vic's for chow, and we all went our own way after that. But these were great guys. And here is this is General McAbee on the right, and General Denny Haley, probably one of the greatest Marine officers ever. He went to 3 stars, and and he might be online right now. He's certainly been invited. And this is really interesting. There's a young man named Jody Lynch. I met him, he's a second lieutenant. I gave a little talk to his platoon here in Hawaii. Jody was one really neat guy. He, second lieutenant, all of a sudden, I hadn't seen him forever, and the general and a couple of colonels were landing by helicopter at a place called Fire Base Skin. There's a series of fire bases right on the Pakistani border in Afghanistan, and the Taliban were constantly rocketing these people and making artillery rounds, which General McAbee knows because he's an artillery officer, clearly one of the finest MOSs in the Corps. And then so here's the Afghan army. I think there's a couple hundred young soldiers there under the guidance of this Marine captain and a handful of Marines. They're being trained. And General McAbee is giving a talk about, well, helicopters would drop us, but the artillery fire came in so sporadically. The helicopters went up the sky and parked for a couple hours, so they came back and got us later. And by the way, some of these guys in the army, some of these guys in the Afghan army are only about 13, 14 years old. Now, there's a long-running dispute about this. I thought this young lady was from Alabama. It turns out she's really from Tennessee. And but she must love Alabama football, because whenever I saw a young person, I was writing their hometown story, I knew when the general introduced me, that person was either an artillery MOS or from Alabama. Because rumor has it, Alabama football never loses. And this woman is a Marine reservist. Her husband and her child were back home, and she went through a couple of IEDs. She was a winner. And here is, when we got around, we made a lot of new friends there with the Afghanis, and you can see all these guys here eager to have their picture taken with a Marine. And here's a couple of our favorite meals. I wonder if Tom Grace ever had an MRE. So let's see what we got here. And then this gentleman is unforgettable. Every one of these Marines is reservists from the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines in Chicago. These Marines are, this one is Staff Sergeant Zog. And he might have something to do with saving the general's life, because he was in charge of a convoy of 6 Humvees going from Taqadum to Fallujah. And rather than take the safe long road, they took the short road, which the terrorists hit us. They launched 2 IEDs, which were mistimed, and they came out with some AK-47s, and virtually all died right away. Now, he was the lead vehicle, and he was out of the firing range, but he had to take a U-turn and go back and make sure everybody was safe. And then, let's see, then I didn't know these guys were all, that was my unit, 2nd Battalion, 24 Marines. So this gentleman's unloading right in front of General Halake and General McAbee and a few colonels. He's unloading all the luggage, and he sees my helmet bag where I kept my computer, and he sees this logo right here, 2nd Battalion, 24 Marines with Chicago's skyline. And he looked at me and he said, how does someone like you get this? Because, most people know the journalists and the newspaper guys are out for negative news. And one of the things that I don't think I was a very good reporter, but I think General Grayson and General McAbee knew that I was writing positive stuff. And this gentleman saw this, and he knew he was transporting a journalist, but of course, he didn't have any respect for the industry. And he saw that. He said, how did somebody like you get this? And I said, because that's my unit, asshole. and then he immediately said, all of us are from 224. We're all Chicago policemen, and we're here for a tour in Iraq. And he and I became lifelong friends. He's now a master sergeant, and he's still with the Chicago Police Force. And he, in the next birthday ball, they had me as their speaker, and I made him stand up, and we embarrassed each other. And this gentleman is General Jackson. He traveled with General McAbee and I the whole time. You notice in my pocket, that's where I record all my stories, with a pen and a pad of paper. And I'm not sure JJ was that eager to be my buddy, but I gave him a hug anyway. And we went to one place where one wild time in Iraq, they gave us Budweiser non-alcoholic beer, and everybody signed this thing here. And herein going back to fire-based skin, these are all MREs, and the one thing they have in common is these MREs all have pork in them, since they are, as you know, the Muslims don't eat pork. And here is Jody Lynch. She's now a full colonel in charge of special ops at Camp Lejeune. And here's one of the, remember these, I know in Africa, they won't let you take your picture, but in Afghan, they run up to get your picture taken. And all these headdresses have something to do with their tribal culture. Then I took a separate vehicle and went and visited the embassy instead of having half a dozen Marines like we do around the world, we had a full company of about 200 Marines at the embassy in Kabul. Kabul's misspelled, isn't it? So then, and this is Jody again. They had 3 dogs at Fire-Based Skin. They didn't have names, so we named Jody and I named the white one Sailor because he slept all the time. Then the other one we named Jarhead because he was kind of better looking. And then here's typical kids they have there in fighting the war. It's a tough culture for young people. These are actual soldiers there. These are soldiers in the. This is the artillery piece they use. They have a way of counter firing, computing where the artillery is coming in, and they get to their piece, and they fire back at the terrorists that are shooting at us, and we take a couple of Humvees and go up there and try to get them. This is back at Bagram interviewing a couple of Marine helo pilots. These are the guys that drained 1,000,001 porta potties. This is back in Djibouti now. We went the night patrols several times. One of the things we do at night better than the other outfits, we have these night vision goggles, and we can see the enemy and they can't see us. These night goggles cost as much as $1,000 a piece, and unfortunately now there's quite a few left behind in Afghanistan. But we go out there. We go out there with a small convoy of Humvees and try to find out what's going on. And this is the General's G4, and unlike the Air Force and the other G4s and G5s in the world, there's no luxury in it. Few cargo nets, and a lot of Marines working hard. And here we are in Bagram. And here, I just recently have John Ripley's son. Colonel Ripley's son just moved here to Hawaii, and he's become a Marine Corps engineer. And the Marine Corps engineering unit in Afghanistan tore down the statue of Saddam. And they took a couple of AK-47s that were solid gold, and this statue, they lasered off the head. And they're trying to smuggle it back to their unit and put it in a museum or something like that. But the official authorities with the army confiscated it in the Kuwait, and it never made it out. But this is what's left of Saddam. And this is once again back in night patrol in Djibouti. And this is my last slide and my last flight home. I have a lot of time, unlike the most recent photos you got. On several of my flights on the C-17, I had the entire aircraft to myself. So I put some cardboard out, lie down and get some sleep, and I go back and forth to the cockpit and see how the flight was going. One time I had an 11-hour flight from the Doha area all the way back to Landstuhl. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Oh, thank you, PT. That was quite a tour.
PT, I might add, this is Larry Gonzalez. I was in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, Al-Jabar, etc. And we had attached to our civil affairs unit a Kuwaiti colonel who became very good friends with our commanding officer. Anyway, after the war and 100-hour war, etc., he addressed us and told us that he thought that the president was quite knowledgeable and very smart man, because he did not pursue invading Iraq, which the rest of the world thought we should have done, as you mentioned and admitted to being a part of. And he suggested that the balance of power that Saddam Hussein had exercised in that region in balance to the Iran situation and political situation, not mentioning Afghanistan, was the balance of power that kept that part of the world in check. And
Right.
obviously, in retrospect, he may have been very, very correct in his presentation and assumption.
Jerry, you could, Larry, you couldn't be more right. You know, what Iran and Iraq spent over 10 years killing each other on a draw. And I was thinking, what a good deal. These guys, you know what, these guys like us, they're shooting each other nonstop for 10 years. And all of a sudden, when we went in and changed the balance of power.
That's correct. We did change the balance of power in that region, and we're paying the price for it now.
Good comment.
You know, I had someone email me this morning who did not think he would make it onto our call, but he had a question that Becky and I discussed on our own concerning the evacuation and the withdrawal of our troops and civilian personnel in Afghanistan. Everyone, you know, kind of recognizes that the timetable was screwed up. But how could someone have missed the concept of getting the civilians out while our armed forces were still there, rather than, you know, withdrawing the lion's share of our armed forces, you know, and leaving a skeleton crew to protect, you know, a giant evacuation of civilians? Seems, you know, sort of a lack of common sense there.
Tom, that's a great question. I really believe our military, our senior military guys, I'm not sure I have faith in the guys we got at the top right now, but I can't believe they didn't suggest the contrary. I think our president just wanted to have an expeditious out. It wasn't interested. He's never served in the military, had no concept of the way it should go.
Yeah. And, you know, for how long? A year, a couple years, we've heard about the problems our Afghani interpreters and others have been having, getting visas, getting out, getting their families out. And that's the other thing I don't know that we'll ever get an answer to, is to why, you know, you don't wait till the last minute to, you know, start processing visas and getting all these people, you know, our allies in arms off the battlefield.
Well, clearly bringing probably about 100,000 Muslims and Afghanis into America, and some of these guys are heroes and deserve to get out. But they come with families and sons, and people that are very much into the Taliban culture and the Muslim culture. And I think in times to come, we'll find someone that will come back to haunt us.
I think that's almost guaranteed, but the situation would have been the same if we had begun to withdraw our guys and their families 2 years ago, rather than two or 3 months ago. You know, but I agree with you, and that's a danger that we're going to be living with for a while, maybe a long while.
Well,
General, this is Larry Gonzalez again, sir. Aren't we in your strategy? Did you ever consider the impact that Pakistan culture, army, presence, military, etc., has on that whole area?
Well, you know, you know, Afghanistan, you know, the Iranians have influence in parts of it. Iraq has influence with certain tribes. Pakistan, the Central Asian republics, and others. So that, you know, Pakistan always provided the Taliban a safe haven, and I mean, that's where they would go in the winter. They'd go back into those Northwest Territories and wait for the spring to come and would attack again. But Pakistan was it's a big country, a nuclear power, and so I don't know why, but I guess we were unwilling to, poke Pakistan in the nose. But Pakistan is not our friend.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. Good.
The question came up on why we left so many civilians behind there and so long. I don't know. I'm not sure anybody outside the Beltway really knows, other than maybe General McKenzie and some of his folks down at Central Command. But I don't think anyone expected the Afghan National Army to fold as quickly as they did. Although I was never directly involved in the training, I mean, from early on, you could go around and you could talk to the young Marines who were involved in training the Afghan Army, such as Jody Lynch and some of the others. I mean, the feeling was these soldiers would fight, and if you look at the casualties that Patrick threw up, 66,000 casualties. I mean, they obviously did fight. So I think there was a lot. There was some feeling that we had time to evacuate these Americans after we pulled the military out, that the Afghan National Army would hold. But the political decision was an arbitrary decision to set some arbitrary date, which at one time was 9/11. Those optics didn't look good, and that morphed somehow to October the 31st, was to get the military out. So that was, obviously just a pure political decision, and pull the military out. And what we found was not dissimilar to what we found in South Vietnam, where we had spent all those years training the South Vietnamese army. That was pretty good. But after the U.S. left and we cut off all logistical and ammunition support to the South Vietnamese, they couldn't, they had no logistics, and they folded. Well, what we did with the Afghan National Army, we'd been flying close air support for them. They'd been fighting on the ground, but close air support was a huge multiplier. Once we pull the close air support capability out of Afghanistan, and they've gotten used to it, I think that accelerated the collapse of the army.
Yeah, why is it that we thought that somehow by pulling the air support out, that our experience in other places, that somehow was going to be different? Pull the air support. We trained them to use close air support. We jerked it all out all of a sudden. Did we somehow think that the Afghan Air Force was going to come in and fill in?
I can't imagine that. In my wildest imagination, I can't imagine that we thought that. It's one thing to teach these countries how to fly an airplane. It's a totally different level of expertise to be able to do close air support with those airplanes. And clearly the Afghan National Army was incapable of doing it. They had jets. I mean, they have helicopters. I mean, it was a horrible decision to have pulled the airplanes out. And why the senior echelons of the United States military didn't do like Mattis did over Syria and go in there and put their stars on the Resolute desk and say, I'm not a part of this. This won't work. You're dooming all these Afghans left behind and Americans to capture. So,
we did better in Vietnam than we did in. We lasted 11 days in Afghanistan, the entire army.
Apparently, they had a side deal with the Taliban that they would not fight, and that's why it was not a military collapse. It was it was a diplomatic agreement. if you will.
Yeah.
But General and PT, in an attempt to oversimplify things, which of course is a great danger, is our experience in Afghanistan come down to a notion as simple as not having an exit strategy? Is it really that simple? I mean, PT early on put forward the idea of going in, doing our job, and getting out. That's an exit strategy to my mind. But is that the main problem in Afghanistan and perhaps Vietnam as well?
I personally, for myself, don't think we should have ever been there, except for killing bad guys and leaving.
Well, I agree with Patrick on that, but we were there, and
Right.
I'm sure that CENTCOM and at the Pentagon, there was an exit strategy. My guess is the exit strategy was overcome by political considerations, and whatever exit strategy we had was tossed away, and it's obvious we were left up with making up the strategy as we went.
I see.
Getting out of Afghanistan, as a military problem would not have been that hard. I mean, you could have had, as you said here, you started early on drawing down the Americans, the foreign nationals, anybody that wanted to get out. You drew that down to a certain level. We had good bases. I mean, we didn't have, Kabul is the worst. That's why the Soviets got out of Kabul, because it was not defendable. They built Bagram, as Patrick said. But I mean, we were Kandahar and Bagram and other bases. We could have started in a drawdown of the bases and collapsed into, at the appropriate time, collapsed into one, which arguably would have been Bagram.
Yeah.
And got out of there. It's not a hard problem. I mean, it's not like Dunkirk. Trying to get out where you're that heavily pressed. It would have been relatively easy to get out of Afghanistan. I think the hard is what do you do when you leave? What do you do about the Taliban coming back? I mean, that was always the elephant in the room.
Right.
General, do you believe we could have held Bagram a long time, like signed a 100-year lease like we did at Gitmo, and held that as a defensible forward base?
We'll get in touch next week after.
You'd have to have some level of troops, which I think the administration didn't want the number of troops that you'd have to provide adequate security at Bagram. And I don't know what that number was. I've heard the Pentagon said they wanted 6,000 troops there. I don't know if that's right or not, but yes, I mean, Bagram, there's no high ground around it. You don't have to worry about lobbing mortars in, and you could have controlled it. We could have stayed at Bagram. Now the question is, I mean, do you want to stay at Bagram?
Well, do we want? Is there any use in having a forward operating base right in the heart of our enemies?
I think what we probably give up most about having no presence now in Afghanistan is intelligence. If you're there on the ground, you can have a much more robust intelligence collection capability than if the word now is over the horizon. To attack over the horizon is relatively easy if you can identify the targets.
Right.
When we first went into Afghanistan, for the first time in history, our ability to strike targets was greater than our ability to collect targets, because we had all these precision munitions. I mean, if you had the location, it was one shot, one kill. You didn't miss, and so the challenge was acquiring the targets, not hitting the targets. I think that's the great challenge that we're going to have in Afghanistan now, is how do you acquire these targets? If you've got a target, can you take it out from over the horizon? Yes.
Wow.
You know, one thing that you both discussed a moment ago or touched on was a general, when you were talking about the military having an exit strategy and then that being changed at some point, perhaps by because of politics. We're always going to have some sort of interruption between our political leaders and our military leaders. As a senior Marine officer, was that something that was sort of always on your mind or on the back of your mind?
No, you know, I think, I think this friction, the degree of friction between the military and civilian leaders. I mean, back to Korea, it goes back to the Civil War, to Korea. You saw it in World War II. I mean, it's always there. But historically, we've always had in the United States, you had military officers that were willing to resign if necessary to make a point. I mean, Mattis did it over Syria. I mean, that's not something that's un-American. That's always been part of our national security fabric. I think what you've seen in this episode in Afghanistan is, I just don't think you can make a case that the American military agreed with these decisions that were made. They couldn't have. I don't think they could have agreed with. But at some point, you need to speak up, because we've done a lot of harm to our country, and I think the harm you're going to see is maybe not in Afghanistan, but I mean, what have we done to embolden Kim Il-jung to build a nuclear weapon, the Iranians to build nuclear weapons, China to go after Taiwan, the Soviet Union to go back into Ukraine, maybe even a nuclear arms race that we haven't seen before, where people thought the United States were resolute. I don't know the answer to any of those questions, but I do know I think there's strategic implications to what have occurred in Afghanistan, and we're tending to focus, and I guess that's right now because it's so close to us. We're tending to focus on the tactical implications of it, but I think the strategic implications could be a lot greater.
The lieutenant colonel just resigned, trying to make his point with the administration. Lieutenant Colonel Marine just resigned, all upset about friends of his who had died over there.
How do you think this decision is going to affect the rest of the country, rest of the world perception of the United States after this withdrawal? I've been talking about that on the news. I just wondered what your opinion was, General.
I mean, I don't think the rest of the world the rest of the free world and even our enemies look upon the United States. They look to the United States for leadership. So I think there's some near-term impact. But you harken back to the fall of Vietnam. There was I think there was some of the same perceptions, and it was how the United States responded in the weeks and months and years after that. So I think we just have to see what we do in the United States to respond and to rebuild confidence in the leadership of the United States, and that chapter hasn't been written yet.
And that could be a while.
It could be a while.
Well, PT and General McAbee, Mr. Galloway, and others, I feel I've learned a lot. I certainly appreciate you sharing your experiences with us today. And if there's no other questions, I'll suggest we adjourn.